In 1964, when Michael Shaara first brought his children to Gettysburg, he had no idea that a simple vacation would lead to an obsession that 7 years later would produce what many of us now recognize as the classic novel of the Civil War, The Killer Angels. That book would earn him a Pulitzer Prize, and yet to his enormous disappointment, the novel did not become the commercial success he had hoped. It was the film Gettysburg, based on The Killer Angels, that propelled his novel to #1 on the bestseller list and brought it to the attention of millions of readers. All of that beginning 5 years after Michael Shaara's death. He had no idea what he had left behind. It's fallen to his son Jeff to keep the legacy of his father alive, not only through Jeff's own novels, including 8 New York Times bestsellers, but by providing recognition for those writers who understand very well the challenges every writer faces. In Michael Shaara's 40-year career, through 4 published novels and 70 short stories, he understood that anyone who takes up the pen should hope to accomplish one goal above all others: to tell a good story. In recognition of that effort, Jeff Shaara has, for the 12th consecutive year, sponsored this literary prize in his father's name. Unfortunately, Jeff Shaara could not be with us this evening because his alma mater, Florida State University, is honoring him tonight for his writing. The writers among us will not miss the irony there, I'm sure. Jeff sends his deepest respects to this year's recipient of the Michael Shaara Prize with the following note, which he asked me to read to all of you tonight. Quote, "My father understood, and I do now, that most often a writer labors in isolation, living in a time and a place of his or her own creation. Rarely does any serious writer put a priority solely on critical recognition. My father certainly did not. He ignored critics his entire career. Besides storytelling, though, he had one other goal: to create a piece of work so that he would be remembered, that he would leave something behind. His premature death took away that satisfaction. But anyone who has read and appreciated The Killer Angels knows with certainty that my father succeeded far beyond his dreams, and his legacy lives on. Through extraordinary good fortune, it is my privilege to carry on the kind of work my father cherished most. But the legacy of Michael Shaara is not solely in my own hands. It rests with every writer who labors often in obscurity, whose goal is to create a story because it matters first to the writer. The goal of this literary award is to recognize that great storytelling matters to us all, that the recipient of this award has produced a work of excellence that my father would most certainly have appreciated and enjoyed. It is my enormous privilege to offer the 2011 Michael Shaara Award for Excellence in Civil War Fiction to Robin Oliveira for her novel, My Name is Mary Sutter. My sincerest congratulations, Jeff Shaara," end quote. It is with great pleasure that I would now like to call Robin Oliveira forward to receive the 2011 Michael Shaara Prize for Excellence in Civil War Fiction. My Name is Mary Sutter chronicles the life of a midwife who dreams of becoming a surgeon. The novel follows the protagonist as she leaves her Albany, New York home and travels to Washington, D.C. to tend to the Civil War wounded. Rich with period detail and based on comprehensive research, My Name is Mary Sutter is told in a voice that captures the tumult of the Civil War with clarity, illuminating the period while following a heroine who wants to become a surgeon because she was told she could not. Congratulations, Robin.
Thank you to the Civil War Institute for this immense honor. Like all of America, reading Michael Shaara's The Killer Angels propelled me into a personal relationship with the Civil War. What had seemed dull, remote history was now riveting, intimate story, seducing this reader into a love of historical fiction whose ultimate consequence turned out to be the writing of My Name is Mary Sutter. And if I were to enumerate the ways in which his son Jeff Shaara has vivified the experience of war, we would be here all night. To be honored in Michael Shaara's name by his son's commemorative prize is as fabulous and validating as it gets for a writer of Civil War fiction. 9 years ago, when I first began to write about a 19th century midwife whose zeal to become a surgeon ultimately drives her onto the war's battlefields, I visited Gettysburg for the first time in my life. My garrulous and intrepid guide narrated for me the 3 days of battle, from Cemetery Hill to the angle of the stone wall, which is where he left me that cold February afternoon, looking out over the field where the Confederate Major General George Pickett led his men to slaughter. I was alone, the day too blustery for anyone to be outside. But as I looked toward the copse of trees in the distance, I could feel the ghosts who linger on that field rise. I believe they linger to remind us of what transpired here, brother against brother, friend against friend, northerner against southerner. That moment, as holy and sacred a one as I have ever experienced, helped me to understand, as I never had before, Mr. Lincoln's brilliant distillation of the meaning of the war. His address, his words, only 278 of them, immortalized the devotion and dedication of the men who had died so that a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal would long endure. My Name is Mary Sutter was born at that transcendent moment on this battlefield. I had just come from the National Archives in Washington, D.C., where I had sifted through artifacts of Civil War hospitals and discovered nurses' diaries, sealed in plastic and long forgotten, their scrawled and increasingly harrowing entries, a compelling and unsung tale of their courageous sacrifices. Haunted, I hunted down the site of the Union Hotel Hospital, long demolished, where those same nurses had worked, and where I just decided my fictional Mary Sutter was to labor. Around me on the busy streets of Georgetown, people shopped or rendezvoused for brunch, but I stood awed, thinking of the courage displayed by the women and men who cared for the wounded without antibiotics, IVs, or antiseptics, challenging my own courage, for as a registered nurse, I could not imagine facing such a disaster without the tools we take for granted today. And then I realized that no one remembered anymore what had taken place on that very spot. That as a nation we had forgotten the dedication of the men and women who endeavored to bring healing and comfort to wounded men with so little medical knowledge, it's a miracle that anyone survived. It was then that I heard the nurses' whispers. Don't let them forget us. Tell them our story. Tell them who we were. I had no idea, standing in front of the ghost of the Union Hotel, that it would take me nearly a decade to fill that gap in the national narrative, or the volume of research that was still in my future. I only knew that I had made a pledge, and that I would tell their story, no matter what. Their story became My Name is Mary Sutter, a tale of dedication, love, family, and the beginning of modern medicine and nursing in America, a story born of a private and captivating moment on this very battlefield, given creative permission by Michael Shaara's transforming opus, and cemented in the lives of men and women who grappled with some of the most difficult circumstances any of us could imagine. I write historical fiction because history has to be remembered, because circumstances change, but human nature does not, because fiction can provide a mirror to help us understand ourselves. I learned that from Michael Shaara when I first picked up his book and waded into the nightmare that was Gettysburg. To quote again from Mr. Lincoln, "The world will little note nor long remember what I have said here tonight. But I hope that Mary Sutter will endure. so that those who devoted themselves to care for the men who gave their last full measure of devotion will never be forgotten. I am tremendously honored to receive this award. My gratitude is deep, my indebtedness everlasting, and my appreciation boundless. Thank you very much.